100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with David Mickey's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com on the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for only $5 a month. Get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. Buy a CD of your favourite host shows for a previous season. Maybe an EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents, or possibly, if the offer's available, something else like maybe a 75,000 seed pack. But, do follow the instructions carefully and understand your quarantine laws for importing of things. Thanks for listening to Revolution Radio. This is, we're halfway through show number 483. And if Mackie wasn't muted, he would say 380 and 400, because that's what he does.
That's what I do.
There he is. Hey, and also thanks for letting us into your lives. Now, Mackie, this show arc is the topic of Parasitic class rules us, and this is part 5 in the series.
Oh wow, it was quick, doesn't it?
Wow, yeah, and I think we're just about halfway in the show notes.
That's just about right, actually. We're on page 2250.
But there was something that I wanted to say first off, yeah, about the thing that I found. I found this Klaus Schwab text I found from his book. Let me see if I'm having trouble pulling it up, because the current call is giving me grief, Becky.
Oh really? Oh okay, I've got it up if you want me to send it to
maybe you'd like to read it.
Okay, I'll read it. Let me just open up the one that you said. Here we go. Okay. At least 4 billion useless eaters shall be eliminated by the year 2050 by means of limited wars, organized epidemics of fatal rapid-acting diseases, and starvation. Energy, food, and water shall be kept at subsistence levels for the non-elite, starting with the wide populations of Western Europe and North America, and then spreading to other races. The population of Canada, Western Europe, and the United States will be decimated more rapidly than on other continents until the world's population reaches a manageable level of 1 billion. Of which 500 million will consist of Chinese and Japanese races, selected because they are people who have been regimented for centuries and who are accustomed to obeying authority without question. There you go. Now and then there's the next bit here, which is really
that's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
From time to time there shall be artificially contrived food and water shortages and medical care to remind the masses that their very existence depends on the goodwill of the Committee of 300.
Committee of 300. That sounds like the stakeholder economy that they've put together in the Great Reset.
It's a club of Rome. It's got 300 members.
There you
go. These institutions are in existence today. Look, whether or not it is from his book, I don't know. It might very well.
It is actually from his book. It is from his book. Yep.
That's exactly how they think. Those guys. Make no mistake. That's how they're thinking. Okay?
The very fact that he used the phrase "useless eaters."
Yeah.
It puts the reader into the position that he shares, and that we don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Does it not?
Yeah, 100%.
And to them, we don't. That's why they have wars. They just throw us at each other, for what they call as a greater good, and millions die, and then we move on again.
By the book By the way, that book is free.
Ooh.
It's a PDF, which is completely free. It's hilarious, eh?
So, that's not the reason for this show's arc, but it is. I think it says it very well, the position of the parasitic class. Now, when you hear us say that, and Mekki has promised not to use the term elite,
Nope.
again, so I'm saying it, and it's because when you say that someone is elite, you're putting them on a pedestal, and that's not the objective of this show arc, but rather to remind us all that that they're not really contributing to society. While they say they are, and they feel as though they are, there's nothing that they do that if we lost electricity would mean anything to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
At all. They have sit up, just like the monkey sitting on atop of a pile of bananas, they sit atop a pile of money which they could never spend. It's too much money to spend. I mean, it sounds like a wonderful problem to have. And if you think, mo money, mo problems, it's kind of not really. They only tell you that because they don't want you to achieve what they've achieved. If we could all become billionaires, then they'd be useless.
Yeah, look, the thing is this. I've got the book here. I've just searched through it, and I can't find that page.
Really?
Not in it.
Oh.
So I'm gonna read it now. Having said that, I only skimmed it, and I did a search, but the search didn't come up with the keywords.
Oh.
And it's about how many pages? Lots of pages. But yeah, I haven't got it. So, and this is the book that's called COVID-19: The Great Reset. Okay, written in 2020, Schwab 2020. So it's anybody can download it. It's free. But I can't find that particular.
I'll find the book. That's what I'll do.
Yeah, look, I can send it to you, John. But
No. I'll find the book that has that in it.
Yes, please do, absolutely. And then we'll actually we can do that here. But look, like I said, it doesn't matter whether or not he wrote it in his book, but this is the plan. I mean, the Georgia Guidestones tell you this. Agenda 21 tells you this. The constant need for the elite to stay in power tells you this, because the more of us there are, the less likely it is that control will be maintained. Because the more of us useless eaters, as it were, the greater the chance of anarchy. It's just the nature of the beast, especially with the changing conditions on the earth due to climate change, etc., etc. It is a lot harder to keep control of us and, well, power. So they have to do something. Okay, and right now they can still do something, but they're running out of time. Okay. Okay, so it was actually Dr. John Coleman who wrote this.
Was that the Committee of 300?
No, it's called the Assisted Suicide Debate, the Euthanasia Assisted Suicide Debate. That's where, that's it. That's where it's from. It's
Truth Control.
Let me just get that. The Euthanasia Assisted Suicide Debate. Open link in your tab. Okay, he wrote in 1997 that by 2050, that's it. At least 4 billion useless eaters. It's nice, isn't it? And the book was it's actually Dimitra M. Papa's Euthanasia Assisted Suicide Debate. That's what that's where the quote.
That's the context.
Yeah. Anyway, that's where we are, right? So it's not actually from Klaus, unless Dave you can find it and we can show to our listeners that it's actually from that. But it's definitely Dr. John Coleman that wrote it. And there's another PDF here. Melinda Gates added engineered viruses. Humanities at least 4 billion shall be eliminated in 2050. Yep. It's a common theme across the whole, but in fact, it was written in 1994.
That's true. Yes, and I thought the book was. I can't find the book name. That's all right. We'll keep going.
And it was actually it harks back to the useless eaters in the Third Reich. The Nazis murdered about 250,000 disabled people. If you know, I mean, millions of Jews, etc., but also 250,000 disabled people because they were useless or considered useless by the Nazis. So it's really it's a horrendous kind of way of looking at the world, right? If you think about it. Now, but the thing is, how did it get here, Dave? How on earth did it actually all? I mean, how did we surrender control of our lives to these parasites?
Mm-hmm.
What happened, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is the interesting thing, and there's not one answer, but there's an approach to an answer which we're going to share with you here, and it comes from the text we've been sharing with you for the last couple of weeks. And with King Henry VIII relaxing the usury laws in the 1500s, the money changers flooded the market with their gold and silver coins, becoming richer by the minute, probably literally by the minute. The English Revolution of 1642 was financed by the money changers, backing Oliver Cromwell's successful attempt to purge the Parliament and kill King Charles. What followed was 50 years of costly wars, costly to those fighting them and profitable to those financing them. This is really very important. I remember I had a lecturer at university, Dr. Keith Sutter. He was also a member of the Club of Rome, and his political sciences lecture. And he said, wars are never profitable. Wars are always, an abomination, and no one wins. And even then, we're talking 30 years ago now, right? Mm-hmm. Even then I thought, no, you're wrong. And of course he was wrong. There are always people who profit from wars. Do countries profit from wars? Not necessarily. Do the people that fight the wars profit? No, not necessarily. But the people that finance the wars and the people that are involved in the rebuilding and the arming initially, of course, they profit from wars immensely. It's a $1 trillion industry, not billion, trillion. And just, I mean, think about it, right? They destroyed Iraq, bombed it, to within a smither of its life, and then somebody had to rebuild it, and it cost money too. I mean, each cruise missile cost $1 million. Each cruise missile that was launched of these, Navy ships cost $1 million. They launched hundreds, if not thousands, of those things. So yes, somebody is making money. So profitable, in fact, that it allowed the money changers. We're talking about back in the 1642, right? That allowed the money changers to take over a square mile of property known to this day as the City of London, which remains one of the 3 main financial centers in the world today. The City of London, okay, not the actual City of London, but the financial heart, the square mile that is in the center of London. The 50 years of war left England in financial ruin. The government officials went begging for loans from guess who? And the deal proposed resulted in a government-sanctioned, privately owned bank which could produce money from nothing, essentially legally counterfeiting a national currency for private gain. That's one of the levers they used, and that's how some of this started. Now the politicians had a source from which to borrow all the money they wanted to borrow, and the debt created was secured against public taxes. It's genius. It really is. I wish I had thought of it. You would think someone would have seen through this and realized they could produce their own money and owe no interest. But instead, the Bank of England has been used as a model. And now nearly, in fact, I would say every nation on Earth, well, actually that's not true, almost every nation on Earth has a central bank with fractional reserve banking at its core. Quite a few Muslim nations don't follow this, believe it or not. Usury is still a sin. These central banks have the power to take over a nation's economy and become that nation's real governing force. What we have here is a scam of mammoth proportions covering what is actually a hidden tax being collected by private concerns. It's a racket. It's a racket. Right? This is racketeering. This is the very definition of racketeering. It is the longest con that we have been exposed to as the human race. And we don't know any better because we were born into it. It's just the status quo as far as all of us are concerned. We don't know any better. Back 200 years ago, even 100 years ago, people were fighting this tooth and nail because they knew better. They knew better. We should be living like the Amish, but we're not. Now, these central banks have the power to take over a nation's economy and become that nation's real governing force, right? I said this again, real governing force. The country sells bonds to the bank in return for money it cannot raise in taxes. The bonds are paid for by money produced from thin air. We discussed this. In fact, there no longer is any requirement in many countries to have a fractional reserve. So I think it's a misnomer, Dave. Fractional reserve lending no longer is a thing. It is now I'll lend whatever I feel like. Thank you very
That's right, not fractional, just whatever, yeah.
Whatever. The government pays interest on the money it borrowed, right? By borrowing more money in the same way. There's no way this debt can ever be paid down. It has and will continue to increase. That, my dear friends, is the true origin of inflation and hyperinflation. Okay? You're just injecting more money that came from nowhere, backed by nothing. No means of production, no, inherently valuable things, nothing. Okay? If the government did find a way to pay off its debt, the result would be that there would be no bonds to back the currency. So to pay the debt would be to kill the currency. This has been, and I remember going to lectures about this 25 years ago. Our currency is a debt currency. If you eliminate debt, you eliminate our currencies. That sounds completely insane, right? And you think, that can't be right, Mickey. We are completely backed by debt. Our currencies are backed by debt. It used to be backed by gold. Now, it's backed by bonds. But these bonds are debt. So if you pay off your debt, the currency would disappear. Let that sink in for a second. Let it sink into your cranials there for a moment. That's unfortunately though, that's exactly right. That's what happens. If the governments paid off their debts, the currency would simply disappear because it's now a debt-backed currency. These bonds are certificates of debt. With its formation, the Bank of England soon flooded Britain with money. With no quality control and no insistence on value for money, prices doubled with money being thrown in every direction. One company was even offering to drain the Red Sea to find Egyptian gold lost when the Red Sea closed in on their pursuit of Moses. True story. By 1698, the national debt expanded from £1.25 million to £16 million, 12-fold. And up went the taxes the debt was secured on. Because debt in itself is not enough. I mean, how do you secure the debt? Well, I can pay down my debt, because you never pay it off, but you pay it down, right? You pay against it, and you do that by taxing everybody. You understand? You're only paying the interest on the debt, really, for the most part. Because you have to borrow more money, and more money. And it's a never-ending income stream for those people that gave you the money in the first place. But the money came from nowhere to begin with. What a wonderful, wonderful scheme. And again, I said it before, and I'll say it many more times before this is over. I wish I had thought of it. As hard as it might be to believe, there are two great cons. One is religion, and this is the other one. And I was just too late. Too late. As hard as it might be to believe, in times of economic upheaval, wealth is rarely destroyed, which is true, and instead is often only transferred. 100% true. And who benefits the most when money is scarce? Yes, that's right. Those controlling what everyone else wants. The money changers, the bankers, the parasites. When the majority of people are suffering through economic depression, you can be sure that a minority of people are continuing to get rich. And the thing is this, there's now another class, the billionaires, right? And the billionaires, the Bezos, Musk, etc., Zuckerberg, they actually added significant percentages to their net worth during this pandemic that we've just lived through. They added billions and billions to their fortune. Right? I mean, you can only imagine how much the bankers added. Even today, the Bank of England expresses its determination to prevent the ups and downs of booms and depressions, yet there have been nothing but ups and downs since its formation, with the British pound rarely being stable. Now, this is taking the context of the British pound. One thing, however, has been stable, and that is the grown fortune of Dave.
The Rothschilds.
Yeah, and you shouldn't start your car tomorrow, is all I'm saying.
Oh, thanks for making me say it.
I didn't say
Good
it.
on you. Yeah, no, I clearly said it. That's what happened. Hey, kids, want to start Dad's car? So, Mekki, I found the book and I've posted it to you. I've also posted a copy of the book into the chat room, and you can buy it. It's $30 in paperback form. And
in fact, okay, go on. Yep.
So it's Dr. John Coleman's comprehensive work, Conspirators' Hierarchy: The Story of the Committee of 300.
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
Yeah. So that's confirmed. It's in there. Okay, the Rothschilds, and it's got a date here, Mekki. Was that the establishment of them, 1743?
Pretty much.
Yeah. All right. A goldsmith named Amschel Moses Bayer opened a counting house in Frankfurt, Germany in 1743. He placed a Roman eagle on a red shield over the door, prompting people to call his shop the Red Shield Firm, pronounced in German as Rothschilds. Rothschild. His son later changed his name to Rothschild when he inherited the business. Loaning money to individuals was all well and good, but he found it much more profitable loaning money to governments and kings. It always involved much bigger amounts, always secured from public taxes. Once he got the hang of things, he set his sights on the world by training his five sons in the art of money creation before sending them out to the major financial centers of the world to create and dominate the central banking systems. J.P. Morgan was thought by many to be the richest man in the world during the Second World War, but upon his death, it was discovered it was merely a lieutenant, with the Rothschild Empire owning only 19% of the J.P. Morgan companies. There is but one power in Europe, and that is Rothschild, 19th century French commentator. Mekki.
Which brings us to the American Revolution. And we all think the American Revolution was about Texas and tea and, no, not really. By the mid-1700s, Britain was at its height of power, but also very much in debt. Since the creation of the Bank of England, they had suffered 4 costly wars, and the total debt now stood at 140 million pounds. And in those days, we're talking like 300 years ago, that's a lot of money, right? We're talking in the trillions here.
That's what we're in debt to.
Sorry?
That's our country's debt level. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they complained then. We complain now. Nothing's ever going to happen.
Nothing is going to happen.
But will it?
But this is the thing, though, right? And because everybody that wanted to make a change is alas, no longer with us. In order to make the interest payments to the bank, the British government set about a program to raise revenues from the American colonies. You've heard of that. Largely through an extensive program of taxation. There was a shortage of material for minting coins in the colonies, so they began to print their own paper money, which they called colonial script. This provided a very successful means of exchange, and it also gave the colonies a sense of identity. Colonial, and this is important, colonial script, their money, was provided to help the exchange of goods. It was debt-free paper money, not backed by gold or silver. Let me say this again. This is the most important thing. It was debt-free paper money, not backed by gold or silver, but it was debt-free. During a visit to Britain in 1763, the Bank of England asked Benjamin Franklin how he would account for the newfound prosperity in the colonies. And Franklin replied the following. This is a quote from Benjamin Franklin. That's simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called colonial script. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to no one, Franklin. America had learned the people's confidence in the currency was all they needed, and they could be free of borrowing debts. That would mean being free of the Bank of England. Ba-bow. That's when it all went south. In response, the world's most powerful independent bank used its influence on the British Parliament to press for the passing of the Currency Act of 1764. This act made it illegal for the colonies to print their own money and forced them to pay all future taxes to Britain in silver or gold. And here's what Franklin said after that. Benjamin Franklin again. In 1 year, the conditions were so reversed that the era of prosperity ended and the depression set in, to such an extent that the streets of the colonies were filled with the unemployed. And the next quote is from Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. The colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The inability of the colonists to get power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War. Forget taxation without representation. That's a red herring. It's nonsense. The Boston Tea Party, nonsense. The true reason for the Revolutionary Wars was the colonies had the right to print their own money stripped away from them with the Currency Act of 1764. By the time the war began, April 19th, 1775, much of the gold and silver had been taken by British taxation. They were left with no other choice but to print money to finance the war. What is interesting here is that colonial script was actually working so well, it became a threat to the established economic system of the time. The idea of issuing money, as Franklin put it, in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry, and not charging any interest, again, and not charging any interest, was not causing any problems or inflation. Do we understand that, everybody? This, unfortunately, was alien to the Bank of England, which only issued money for the sake of making a profit for its shareholders. This is the fundamental travesty, perversion that we're living under. I know these are strong words, but I can't think of any others, Dave.
Yeah, and in my head, all I've got is the King's song from Hamilton.
I know, right?
You'll be back like before. I will fight the fight and win the war. I do like that song. It's very cool. It ends the I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. But as we know, it was the taxes imposed on everybody just because they were in debt, so heavily in debt. They needed the money. And you know what? We all know what happened to Benjamin Franklin, right? That happens today. Governments take people out, make them disappear, make their voices quiet, change the narrative, Mackie. It's the winners who write the history books.
Absolutely.
So, the Bank of North America, 1781 to 1785. Very short-lived bank, let's put it that way. If you can't beat them, join them, might well have been his argument when arms dealer Robert Morris suggested he be allowed to set up a Bank of England-style central bank in the USA in 1781. Desperate for money, the $400,000 he proposed to deposit to allow him to loan out many times that through fractional reserve banking must have looked really attractive to the impoverished American government. Already spending the money they would be loaned, no one made a fuss when Robert Morris couldn't raise the deposit and instead suggested he might use some gold, which had been loaned to America from France. Once in, he simply used fractional reserve banking, and with the bank's growing fortune, he loaned to himself and his friends the money to buy up all the remaining shares. The bank then began to loan out money multiplied by this new amount to eager politicians who were probably too drunk with their new power, their power cash, to notice or care how it was done. The scam lasted 5 years until 1785, with the value of the American money dropping like a lead balloon. The bank's charter didn't get renewed, the shareholders walking off with the interest did not go unnoticed by the governor. And here's a quote from Governor Morris. "The rich will strive to establish their dominion and enslave the rest. They always did. They always will. They will have the same effect here as elsewhere if we do not, by the power of the government, keep them in their proper spheres."
No, everything needs to be deregulated. Deregulation.
That's they're all the stopping blocks, right? Regulations. Oh, too many regulations.
No.
So in 1785, the entrepreneur decided to use fractional reserve lending based on gold, and that doesn't go well, Mackie, when you're going against a central bank and a banking system, does it?
It never does, my friend.
No.
Which brings us to the first Bank of the United States, which lasted, 20 years, really, from 1791 to 1811. And we're going to talk about the banking wars, which you probably have never heard of in school. What banking wars, Mackie? The banking wars?
No, you're making it up.
I'm making it up, clearly. I'm a storyteller at heart, right? I like to spin a good yarn. Now, it worked once, it will work again. It's been 6 years. All right, 1785, charter didn't get renewed. 1791, let's try it again. There are a lot of new, hungry politicians. Let's give it a try. And so here it was in 1791, the first Bank of the United States, BUS. Not only deceptively named to sound official, but also to take attention away from the real first bank, which had been shut down. It's
the second first bank.
I know, right? It's hilarious. Its initials, however, gave a clear indication that Americans were once again being taken for a ride. And true to its British model, the name of the investors was never revealed. Having gotten away with it a second time, some of them probably wished Amschel Rothschild had picked a different time to make his pronouncement from his private central bank in Frankfurt. And this is what he said in 1790. "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." Not to worry. No one was listening. Like, no one read Hitler's book either. Why would you? That's just crazy. Mein Kampf. It was all in there. It was all in there. The American government borrowed $8.2 million from the bank in the first 5 years, and prices rose by 72%. This time round, because you introduced interest and inflation. People don't get that. This time round, the money changers had learned their lesson. They had guaranteed a 20-year charter. I'm not 5 years is not good enough. Give me 20 years. Because after 20 years, there's a new generation that never knew any better.
Mm-hmm.
The president, who could see an ever-increasing debt with no chance of ever paying it back, had this to say. This was Thomas Jefferson in 1798. "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution, taking from the federal government their power of borrowing." Because that's the problem, really, that the federal government has the power to borrow money, right? And that's Thomas Jefferson. While the independent press, who had not yet been bought off, not yet, called the scam a great swindle, a vulture, a viper, and a cobra. And according to the Austrian School of Economics, a completely illegal fraud, as you remember from our initial thoughts on fractional reserve lending. As with the real first bank, the government had been the only depositor to put up any real money, with the remainder being raised from loans the investors made to each other. That's brilliant, using the magic of fractional reserve banking. They should all be in Vegas performing on stage every night. When time came for renewal of the charter, the bankers were warning of bad times ahead if they didn't get what they wanted. The charter was not renewed. 5 months later, Britain had attacked America and started the War of 1812. Meanwhile, a short time earlier, I should say, an independent Rothschild business, the Bank of France, was being looked upon with suspicion by none other than Napoleon. And I'll get Dave to talk about Napoleon here. But let's be very clear here. It is almost impossible to understand the context of history unless you understand the hidden history behind it. And it's not just the banking history. You need to understand why things happen. Oh, there was a war. Yeah, but why? Why did they go to war? Right? The American War of Independence. Why? The British-American War of 1812. Why? It doesn't just happen. There's always a reason for it. But tell us, my dear friend, about Napoleon.
He didn't trust the banking. He didn't trust the bank, saying, pardon me, I haven't spoken for a while. When a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they, and not the leaders of the government, control the situation. Since the hand that gives is above the hand that takes, money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain. Napoleon Bonaparte from 1815. For both sides of a war to be loaned money from the same privately owned central bank is not unusual. Nothing generates debt like war. A nation will borrow any amount to win. So naturally, if the loser is kept going to the last straw in a vain hope of winning, then the more resources will be used up by the winning side before their victory is obtained. More resources used, more loans taken out, more money made by the bankers. And even more amazing, the loans are usually given on condition that the victor pays the debts left by the loser. In 1803, instead of borrowing from the bank, Napoleon sold territory west of the Mississippi to the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, for $3 million in gold, a deal known as the Louisiana Purchase. I learned all about that in California, Mackie, when I was there in school. $3 million richer, Napoleon quickly gathered together an army and set about conquering much of Europe. Each place he went to, Napoleon found his opposition being financed by the Bank of England, making huge profits as Prussia, Austria, and finally Russia all went heavily into debt trying to stop him. 4 years later, with the main French army in Russia, Nathan Rothschild took charge of a bold plan to smuggle a shipment of gold through France to finance an attack from Spain by the Duke of Wellington. Wellington's attack from the south and others' defeats eventually forced Napoleon into exile. However, in 1815 he escaped from his banishment at Elba, an island off the coast of Italy, and returned to Paris. By March of that year, Napoleon had equipped an army with the help of borrowed money from the Lombard banking house of Paris. With 74,000 French troops led by Napoleon sizing up to meet 67,000 British and other European troops 200 miles northeast of Paris on June 18th, 1815, it was a difficult one to call. Back in London, the real potential winner, Nathan Rothschild, was poised to strike in a bold plan to take control of the British stock market, the bond market, and possibly even the Bank of England. Nathan, knowing that information is power, stationed his trusted agent named Rothworth near the battlefield. As soon as the battle was over, Rothworth quickly returned to London, delivering the news to Rothschild's 24 hours ahead of Wellington's courier. The power of communication, Mickey. A victory by Napoleon would have devastated Britain's financial system. Nathan stationed himself in his usual place next to an ancient pillar in the stock market. This powerful man was not without observers as he hung his head and began to openly sell huge numbers of British government bonds. Reading this to mean that Napoleon must have won, everyone started to sell their British bonds as well. The bottom fell out of the market until you couldn't hardly give them away. Meanwhile, Rothschild began to secretly buy up all the hugely devalued bonds at a fraction of what they were worth just a few hours before. In this way, Nathan Rothschild captured more in one afternoon than the combined forces of Napoleon and Wellington had captured in their entire lifetime. The 19th century became known as the age of the Rothschilds, when it was estimated they controlled half of the world's wealth. While their wealth continues to increase today, they have managed to blend into the background, giving an impression that their power was waned. They only apply the Rothschild name to a small fraction of the companies they actually control. Some authors claimed that the Rothschilds had not only taken over the Bank of England, but they also had, in 1816, backed a new privately owned central bank in America called the Second Bank of the United States, causing huge problems to the American president.
So it is clear that if you don't understand this history, this particular history, which you don't learn about in the school, and we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson now, you don't understand history at all. You cannot understand why the things have happened they do. And this is how we learn history, though, Dave. We learn it by rote. We learn dates and events, and nobody ever looks behind it.
Mackie, we learn trigonometry, and you know, when are you going to use that outside of physics? So did you watch the video that I sent you?
Yes,
of the guy singing this about school?
Yes.
About what you learn. You don't learn anything about money, about mortgages. You don't learn about how to exist in a money society. You only learn everything else.
Yes, absolutely. And and the thing is this, right? This is a pillar of well, it's one of the pillars of control. It really is. I mean, I'm in my 50s now, right? And I learned about this probably in my 30s. Before that, I had no idea. But once I learned about it, I go, holy moly! How come everybody is not in the streets fighting this?
Yeah.
Well, because nobody knows.
You see, we all flounder about aimlessly without a pure goal to win.
Correct. It's astounding. Now, today, in 2021, it's just the way things are. No one would think of challenging the banks or not renewing a bank's charter. Oh,
jeez.
Nobody.
It would collapse society, Mackie, today.
But would it? Right? That's the question. That's the question, my friend.
What did Andrew Jackson get up to?
Well, Andrew Jackson, this is the period that covers American history from 1828 to 1836. When the American Congress voted to renew the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, Jackson responded by using his veto to prevent the renewal bill from passing. And his response gives us a very interesting insight. I'm quoting here Andrew Jackson. "It is not our own citizens only who are to receive the bounty of our government. More than 8 millions of the stock of this bank are held by foreigners. Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that in its nature has so little to bind it to our country? Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens in dependence would be more formidable and dangerous than a military power of the enemy. If government would confine itself to equal protection and, as heaven does it rains, shower its favors alike on the high and the low, the rich and the poor, it would be an unqualified blessing. In the act before me, there seems to be a wide and unnecessary departure from these just principles." In 1832, Jackson ordered the withdrawal of government deposits from the Second Bank and instead had them put into safe banks. The Second Bank's head, Nicholas Biddle, was quite candid about the power and intention of the bank when he openly threatened to cause a depression if the bank was not rechartered. And there's a quote here from him. "Nothing but widespread suffering will produce any effect on Congress. Our only safety is in pursuing a steady course of firm restriction. And I have no doubt that such a course will ultimately lead to restoration of the currency and the recharter of the bank. I know, right?
That's blackmail.
Biddle, I know. Nicholas Biddle in 1836, right? By calling in existing loans and refusing to issue new loans, he did cause a massive depression. But in 1836, when the charter ran out, the second bank ceased to function. It was then that he made these two famous statements. Okay, this is from Nicholas Biddle yet again. The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. And later, if the American people only understood the rank and justice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution before morning. Okay? Andrew, when asked what he felt was the greatest achievement of his career, Andrew Jackson replied without hesitation, I killed the bank. And sorry, I misquoted. That previous quote was from Andrew Jackson, not from Nicholas Biddle. Okay, again, the bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. And later, this is Andrew Jackson, if the American people only understood the rank and justice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution before morning. And his greatest achievement was he killed the bank. However, as we all know, this was not the end of private financial influence passing itself off as official. When we look at Dave,
Abraham Lincoln. That's the best you'll get out of me. I do like all the impersonators. With this is Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, 1861, 1865. With the central bank killed off, fractional reserve banking moved like a virus through numerous state-chartered banks, instead causing the instability this form of economics thrives on. When people lose their homes, someone else wins them for a fraction of their worth. Depression is good news to the lender, but war causes even more debt and dependency than anything else. So, if the money changers couldn't have their central bank with a license to print money, a war it would have to be. We can see from this quote of the then Chancellor of Germany that slavery was not the only cause for the American Civil War. And the quote is, the division of the United States into federations of equal force was decided long before the Civil War by the high financial powers of Europe. These bankers were afraid that the US, if they remained as one bloc and as one nation, would attain economic and financial independence, which would upset their financial domination over the world. And their financial domination was the European domination. Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany, 1876, on the 12th of April, 1861, this economic war began. Predictably, Lincoln, needing money to finance his war effort, went with his Secretary of the Treasury to New York to apply for the necessary loans. The money changers, wishing the Union to fail, offered loans at 24 to 36% interest. Lincoln declined the offer. An old friend of Lincoln's, Colonel Dick Taylor of Chicago, was put in charge of solving the problem of how to finance the war. His solution is recorded as this, or thusly: just to get Congress to pass a bill authorizing the printing of full legal tender and treasury notes and pay our soldiers with them and go ahead and win your war with them also. Colonel Dick Taylor, when Lincoln asked if the people of America would accept the notes, Taylor said, he says, the people or anyone else will not have any choice in the matter if you make them full legal tender. They will have the full sanction of the government and be just as good as any money, as Congress is given that express right by the Constitution, they argued. Lincoln agreed to this solution and printed $450 million worth of new bills using green ink on the back to distinguish them from other notes. And that's going to obviously be where the term greenback comes from.
Correct.
This is a quote from Abraham Lincoln. "The government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers." It continues, "The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is the government's greatest creative opportunity. By the adoption of these principles, the long-felt want for a uniform medium will be satisfied." He continues, "The taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest, discounts and exchanges. The financing of all public enterprises, the maintenance of stable government and ordered progress, and the conduct of the Treasury will become matters of practical administration. The people can and will be furnished with a currency as safe as their own government. Money will cease to be the master and become the servant of humanity. Democracy will rise superior to the money power." That's Abraham Lincoln. From this, we see that the solution works so well, Lincoln was seriously considering adopting this emergency measure as a permanent policy. This would have been great for everyone except the money changers, who quickly realized how dangerous this policy would be for them. They wasted no time in expressing their view in the London Times. Oddly enough, while the article seems to have been designed to discourage this creative financial policy, in its put down, we're clearly able to see the policy's goodness. And I'll cease at the end of this, Mackie. If this mischievous financial policy, which has its origins in North America, shall become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and will be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry its own commerce. It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all the countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. That's the Hazard Circular, London Times, 1865. Mackie, when was Lincoln assassinated?
Well, exactly right, and that's exactly it, though. I mean, this is, you see, again, you can't understand history if you don't understand the context and the connections here. And look here again, the last sentence. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. Forget monarchy. Right? Now the monarchies, they borrowed money from the from the parasites. I mean, the monarchists themselves are parasites, but the parasite class would have ceased to exist, or it wouldn't be as powerful as it is today, because it would actually have to add value to the economy. It could no longer create wealth out of nothing. Okay?
He was killed the same year.
Yeah, of course he was.
Of course he was.
It was no longer a debt currency, but a true currency. All our currency today is debt. I know this is hard to wrap your mind around, but it's the truth. We are all trading in debt currencies. All these bonds government bonds are certificates of debt. You take them away, the currency disappears, because it's the bonds that back the currency. I know it's a lot. I know it's insane. It doesn't make any sense, but that's where
crazy
we are.
person, Maggie.
I know, right?
They're crazy thoughts.
We can share a little bit more with you from this extract. It's plain to see that it's the advantage provided by the adopting of this policy which poses a threat to those that are not using it. Right? Clearly. Oh, I've got 1 minute. Okay, forget it. But I need you to understand this. So Lincoln wasn't assassinated because of something he did with the South or whatever. I'm sure you know John Wilkes Booth or whoever actually shot him was probably not happy with Lincoln. I mean, you have to find someone that actually wants to do the deed. But the motivations here, and we'll when we get to Kennedy, you'll go, what?
That's right.
We will get to Kennedy here.
It all starts to make sense.
Yeah, and I mean, there are many more. Actually, many other things as well that play into it here. But you should be really angry out there. You should all be very angry to at the crime that has been perpetrated against all of us, because this is a crime of unbelievable magnitude.
So Mickey,
just coming. Go ahead,
just to think that you have to slave yourself away for the whole of your life to pay off a house that you have to live in to be part of society, it's insane. It's insanity. It really is. Anyway, yes, Mickey's right. Jeb's coming up next with his awesome show, After Hours. And listen to it and call in and be part of the show. It's fantastic. This has been another Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mickey, and we'll see you next week. Stay informed, people.